Hi, I'm Dr. Patti Hamilton. I'm Interim Dean of Health Sciences and Human Services at Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls, Texas. I'm a nurse researcher, and I think the reason I'm being interviewed about collective bargaining is past research that I have done and written about with work conditions for nurses who work off-peak hours, that is, nights and weekends.
And what is your biggest concern for nurse leaders in a union environment?
In a union environment? I am not as knowledgeable about union environments as I am about non-union environments, but I can tell you that some of the things that I'll be studying in Australia next year have to do with decisions made about staffing and work intensity at night on the weekend. So with that disclaimer that I have not gone yet and am not embedded in a union environment, I would think a leader would be very precariously placed in an organization, a nurse leader who would need to represent the organization's interest, the patient's interests, and the nurse's interests, and remember to whom they owe allegiance. I think that I imagine that would be a very difficult position in a union environment. However, having said that, from the interviews that were done in our last study, the nurses in non-union environments have a difficult time balancing their allegiance because many times they're put in a position to maximize productivity and profitability, and at the expense often of the nurse's work environment and ultimately perhaps the patient outcomes.
What interventions would be present to reduce the need for unions? Well,
from the research that I have read about the choices people make to unionize, there's two schools of thought. One is that first nurses become unionized and then they lose their professional status in an organization. Another thought is that it's just the reverse. They choose to be unionized because they've already lost their professional status in an organization. So I think that an organization acting out of the belief that nurses were professionals and were autonomous and did have information to contribute about how their units were run would go a long way toward reducing the drive for unionization. Many times when nurses are interviewed, they are not unionizing necessarily only for increases in salary, many times not even for increases in salary, but for increases in power over their own practice. And I think an intervention strategy would be to respect that ability to make decisions.
So as a nurse leader, what are some things that I should do in order to prevent unionization?
Well, I guess first of all would be to examine the need to prevent it. That seems to be the starting position of many nurse leaders in Texas, is that it's something that must be prevented, that it is so dangerous that it cannot be allowed to occur. I think the first thing a leader would do would be to analyze that position and see if indeed that were the case. While I don't think there is a structure, whether it's union or non-union, that is perfect, I think there are strengths in both of those structures, and the search for the thing that produces what we want most, which is the best patient outcomes, is what we ought to be led by, not by a basic assumption that unionizing is the end of nursing as we know it, because I don't think it is. I think it could be, but I don't think it is.
And what type of information would you like to share with nurse leaders concerning the union environment or the non-union environment, either one?
To listen. I think the most important thing a nursing leader could do would be to listen to their staff. I know that some of the research we've done has been looking at the effectiveness of the nurse staffing legislation in Texas, and TNA has had a big part in championing that legislation, and the theory and the assumption behind it is excellent, and that is that we need to listen to nurses, direct care nurses, about the staffing that they need. And that organization that was set up, which is a nurse staffing committee in every hospital, by all rights should solve the problem. But what's happened is that entity, in the small number of cases in which I have studied this problem, only about 4 hospitals, that entity is not the voice for nursing. It is the venue for nurses to be re-educated about the policies that lead to higher productivity and lower staffing. By that I mean, instead of that being a place where nurses can go and be heard, it's a place where administration can get nurses in one room and educate them, if you will, or change their thinking so that they're more team players.
That's great. Is there anything else that you can think of that would be good to share?
I think one more observation, because it sounds like I am only talking in one, that I am perhaps overly favorable toward unionization. I don't think I have an opinion formed yet, but from what I could tell by my colleagues in Australia, where I'm going to do research, there are problems with unionization that have come about in a market environment. And in Australia, which is 100% unionized in nursing, there is something called enterprise bargaining, and nurses wanted this to be instituted so that the union did not do the negotiating for their salary single-handedly. The nurses wanted the ability to go to their employer and negotiate for a higher salary if, and this is why it's called enterprise bargaining, the nurse is allowed by the union to do singular bargaining for a salary if the nurse can provide to the employer higher productivity. So the nurse is then faced with the same kind of dilemma that nurses are faced with here in the United States, which is you're going to have to do more work to get more money. And already, if you're overworked, doing more work is, I think, threatening to patient outcomes. And so what we're studying in Australia is work intensity. Our prediction is that at night, on the weekend, when mortality rates increase, work intensity is higher because staffing is lower. So what nurses do, and they must do it, is ration the care they deliver. So what we're trying to document is what gets left out, or what is rationed, or what is missed care when work intensity increases. So I think the case has not been made yet that there is a right or a wrong way for nurses to be organized or not organized, but I think we're going to have to keep an open mind, or we're going to make our decisions based on ideology and not on fact. So I think the researcher has a real big role to play in helping us decide this, and I hope people will remain open in their attitudes while we're trying to find out the answer.
Great, thank you.